Alright, hello and welcome. My name is Myre, and it looks like Star Citizen has just released the Alpha 313 Invictus Launch Week Postmortem. So we're going to go ahead and have a look at this. So every single time Star Citizen releases something new or something different, events and that kind of thing, they release postmortems at the end of a patch cycle, talking about it, talking about what they could do differently, what they have done differently, because of course Invictus is something they've done once already last year, and of course what they can do for the future. So we're gonna have a look at this and see what it is that they've learned. This is also going to be covering Alpha 313 in general as well, so there'll be some things to take home here for maybe what to expect in future patches going forwards, for, you know, as a result of maybe perhaps experiences that people may not have liked on ones that they have. So let's go ahead and check it out. Alright, so on April 22nd, 2021, we launched Alpha 313 Underground Infamy, which introduced a number of new features and changes, including ship-to-ship docking, additional cave entrances, and the Reputation Manager. The following is a post-mortem from the senior developers themselves, detailing what was delivered and their thoughts on how it went. As a side note, this post-mortem focuses on both the Alpha 313 patch and the Invictus Launch Week event. I believe the last post-mortem we read was about the patch at the time and also Xenothreat. So I think we can expect a 314 and Ninetales Lockdown, and maybe perhaps even Xenothreat 2, one of these going forwards. So the vehicle pillar, John Crew, or the vehicle director of the vehicle pillar, says for SC Alpha 313, the vehicle pillar delivered a mixture of new features, the groundwork for future initiatives, and our usual content drop. So Merlin and Constellation docking. So what went well? We successfully delivered a long-awaited feature to one of Star Citizen's most iconic ships. And yeah, we've been waiting for this for quite a while now, like ever since I think 2016. Although we had aimed to do this in Alpha 312, the decision to spend an extra quarter polishing it paid dividends upon release, as it was much more stable and expansive than originally planned. And by expansive, they mean that they can now use this tech going forwards for not just the Constellation to Merlin docking, but also for things that we've seen already, like the 890 jump, the Hammerhead, and also going forwards to put this into things like the Starfarer's refueling hose and that kind of thing as well. So what didn't go so well? The decision to delay Xenothreat into 2021 meant we were caught up longer than expected in bug fixing for the event, which reduced our ability to react to issues with the feature before it went to Evocati for testing. So what we'll do differently in the future? So generally, the feature process went well, so aside from more testing sooner, there isn't a huge amount we'll improve on in the future. Just keep doing what they're doing. So vehicle names and serials. So we've only seen this for a few ships now, things like the 890 jump, things like the Carrack and the MSR. So what went well? So the ability to personalize your ship has been a long requested feature, and it's something we've wanted to deliver for some time. But we've had a few behind the scenes technical issues we had to solve regarding the rendering and platform to game entitlement flow. The delivery for a small selection of ships proved out the tech and helped us better understand the limitations of the system. So what didn't go so well? So by far the biggest issue was readability, particularly for shorter names where the font size stayed the same as a maximum length of 32 character name. So a short name combined with less than ideal exterior ship lighting and the inability to customize text color led to some major readability problems. Truth. So what we'll do differently in the future? So we're working with the graphics and UI teams on better implementation via building blocks to allow us to dynamically change the font size based on the input string length. An optimized UV layout will be created to accommodate this. The paint system will also have work done in the future to allow players to pick the name color to avoid clashing. Okay, so more name customization going forwards, and it seems like when they were making this before, it was all like on the programmer side and not necessarily to do with the UI team and stuff, which is probably why they had some of these issues. It does seem like in 3.14, some of this work is already being done. If you look at things like in the 3.14 PTU with like the Avenger and certain, not the Avenger, the Saber and certain other ships as well, you will see that there is a placeholder ship name on them, and they do seem to be now using different shaders and stuff like that. So hopefully once this comes in and once it's ready, it'll be better than what it currently looks like. So hull visual degradation. So what went well? So since Star Citizen Alpha 3.6, when we introduced item degradation and misfires, the big part missing was having your ship hull visually degrade alongside the other items, including weapons. So now we've completed this, you get a much improved read on the state of your ship based on the hull's visuals, rather than having to go MFD hunting to see how bad your ship is. The system ties into our existing production pipeline for vehicles, so we didn't have to go back and add it to any ships, making the implementation much quicker. Okay, I'll hold my comments until we see what didn't go well. So there were quite a few ships that were missed in our internal testing sweeps, leading to the canopy entirely scratching over, blocking the view. This was not our intention. Restricting where to the edge of the view was the goal. So that was what I was going to go to. So like for things like the Prospector, I believe the Prospector was missed, and as a result, you can't actually see any of hull visual degradation as you play. We did some testing with this, and we went mining with a Prospector for 3 whole weeks, going out, and somehow during this test, we never 30k'd once. So we went mining, we came back, we stored the ship, rinse and repeat. We made sure it was the same ship by keeping track of the serial number, which changes if you change your ship, but also by leaving things in the ship, things like boxes and picos as persistent markers. And since they didn't go, then we were sure that the ship was persistent, and so the ship didn't degrade. It seems like the Argo Mole, however, fell under this same blanket of being a ship that was missed, but still was affected by the system, because when you go in the Argo Mole and you mine for like 10 minutes, then the entire canopy gets scratched over, and as they say, that's not the goal. So while the actual content side has been part of our pipeline, it wasn't easily visualized, so the content team had to go back and manually adjust the wear maps and settings on older ships. So we'll do differently in the future. So as mentioned, a few ships are dramatically wearing too much in key areas, which will be fixed case by case. In the future, with physical damage, this will move from being a purely visual feature to it having structural and gameplay consequences. So physical damage is when they want to move from hit point pools and stuff like that to actually making the ship damage being due to like ship being damaged due to being the components on the ship taking fire, taking hits, and the canopy and everything else doing the same. So as for what they mean by that, I have no idea, because they still need to maybe perhaps outline physical damage a bit more. So ship to station docking. So while officially not part of the Alpha 3.13 release, we did in fact launch this feature with the patch, albeit disabled, ready to come online with 3.13.1 with the Invictus Launch Week patch. So we had originally aimed to deliver both features in the same patch, but made the decision to officially hold it back, much for the same reasons we held back the Connie Merlin docking, to improve the quality of the release. And for the most part, I mean, I think it worked. We actually did some testing today with the 890 jump, seeing if this feature had degraded any going into 3.14, but it seems to more or less be the way it was, and it seems to work pretty well. So the Tumbril Cyclone MT. So the Cyclone MT was a surprise, straight-to-release vehicle that we worked on during downtime between releases that helped expand our ground vehicle lineup, particularly for Theaters of War, which is still upcoming, but they've mentioned that Theaters of War isn't going to be coming out until not only have they done with Crossroads of Crime, but also with a second event as well. So The challenge of having a mounted turret controlling both missiles and weapons caused some head scratching in the setup phase, but the MT provides an interesting firepower addition to the Cyclone lineup at the expense of being the slowest in the family. I didn't even realize it was a slower vehicle in general. The Greycat Rock DS. Okay, what are they going to say about the Rock? So the Rock DS was a vehicle that struggled both through its development and public release, having originally been designed to be the primary vehicle in the family. We even saw the Rock DS showing up in an ISC sometime like a year ago as they were talking about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to make the Rock in the first place. And then the Chibi Rock showed up, and that was, as people see it at the moment, the ROC. And now the DS is in a really weird place. So, however, due to production timelines, we had to release the Rock well in advance of the Rock DS. The original aim was to have them both released together to provide clearer options for players, but having the significant time gap between them just increased the perception issues surrounding its role and usefulness. And in general, most citizens are still kind of confused as to the use case of the Rock DS, because of course the co-pilot cabin is not sealed, so you can't really use it in extreme environments unless of course the co-pilot's wearing like an enviro suit, in which case it just kind of seems weird. But yeah, while it did get some hefty upgrades during the Evocati and PTU phases, increasing both its capacity and range, these goals were not communicated well enough at the start of the release cycle, leaving it to suffer more than expected. And suffer in this case not only just means suffer in game, but also suffer to the scrutiny of players, you know, including players who made like reviews on it and its usefulness and all that stuff. Of course, the Rock DS did also release with the Greycat RL suit, so I guess it's supposed to be used with it, maybe as like a cost-cutting measure in lore, who the heck knows, right? The Rock DS was never supposed to be a clear upgrade from the Rock. It's a companion allowing two players to work together in more demanding locations further away from the base. So it's a pick or choose, I suppose. It currently sits in a poor position, however, future changes to inventory behavior, the cargo system, and cave setups will perhaps let it regain the position we had intended for it. If it doesn't, we'll investigate further changes to improve its reception. I think the biggest issue really is the fact that it requires two people, where you could literally just have two smaller Greycat ROCs doing the same thing. Of course, you do have the ability for somebody to sit on that other turret and move it and be more free with it, but that seems rather arbitrary since we have ships that have remote turrets that give you this ability without having to have a second whole human being doing that thing. And as Chronicle says in chat there, so put the second person inside and done. Yeah, put the second person inside and then give that person remote turret access. And I think that would not only make it a better looking ship, but also it will also make sense from like a survivability standpoint. However, it'll have to likely be a larger ship in general if you did that, because you have to keep in mind that these ships also need to have space for components. You need to have a power plant, you need to have a shield generator, you need to have all these other miniature components, that the Nova Tonk and other ships do and other vehicles do, and having that player inside will mean that that ship would have to be bigger as a result, thus meaning that the Rock DS would have to be entirely redone just to do it. But it would make for a more desirable vehicle, so we'll have to see whether or not it's worth refactoring or not. So, yeah, so, ooh, what's this? This is, of course, the quantum sensitive material missions and the player holding one of those goddamn freaking things. Alright, so the live pillar is next. So Todd Pappy, the SC Live Director, is the one who wrote this one up. So the EUPU mining subcomponents. So what went well with EUPU mining subcomponents? So we continue to add depth to and expands on the mining gameplay and got these subcomponents up and running fairly smoothly. The quality assurance test request, or Qatar process, went well too, with great communication among the team. So what didn't go so well? So game dev stability was poor, which caused delays in getting up-to-date builds with integrations. And is that to do with COVID or to do with other stuff, I wonder? So what we'll do differently in the future. So the team is creating quality assurance test requests to integrate their work to game dev as a usual process. Unfortunately, QA were super busy with the Alpha 3.13 and 3.13.1 releases, both of which were big ones. This is currently affecting the efficiency of the QATR process, leading to sprint integrations of non-upcoming releases being heavily delayed. So live mission content, so quantum sensitive deliveries and timed multi-drop deliveries. So what went well? So it went smoothly because it was using existing tech, a lot of which was created for the Xenothreat mission. So yeah, it was just Xenothreat missions being put around the verse to add more variety. So what didn't go so well? So some of the boxes didn't behave as expected, which ended up being an issue with the entity behavior. The timers were not showing the correct time and the box would explode with 2 minutes left, so bugs didn't go so well. Hurston isn't the best location for long flight missions because the location distribution. We did increase the payouts, but we'll look at continued refinements. And yes, I've done some of this testing because it's a nice chill thing to do, especially when you're streaming. So like what I'd notice is that these long distance quantum sensitive missions on Hurston would take about 40 minutes, even with like optimum flight planning and that kind of thing, which for some of course is chill, but for others you want something else to do whilst you're doing it, something to kind of pass the time. What I had noticed was that, you know, from going from one pole to another on Hurston, is that there were other outposts along the way. So what I did was I would land out these outposts and actually purchase additional stuff and move resources from one location to another. I think that once resources become more systemic in Star Citizen, they could probably do something with this and make it so that along these flight plans you could land if you so chose and help to distribute goods around Hurston and get an extra payout. I think that all in all, I got like maybe 40,000 Alpha UEC extra by doing trading and like buying things like diamond and titanium and moving them around while doing this mission as well. So I suppose by making it more systemic and adding it to the mission as well, it could maybe make it a bit more desirable. So what we'll do differently in the future? So we need to improve the handoff of the entity behaviors and clear up responsibility between the teams. Okay. And here we have a pirate dabbing in 4K. So core gameplay pillar. So this was Richard Tyrer, the Squadron 42 FPS game director, who wrote this up. They're also part of the, I believe the actor feature team, I guess group, which is a lot about FPS too. So mounted guns. So what went well? So Star Citizen, by its very nature, is a mixed arms game combining on-foot vehicle and ship combat. So mounted gun slot directly into the trifecta. Mounted guns slot directly into that trifecta by allowing on-foot players to challenge vehicles and smaller ships. We already have the Animus missile launcher and Scourge railgun, but they only provide a small amount of resistance before you would run out of ammo. With the long-term integration of homesteads and outposts, we wanted to provide the player and AI with additional options for defending these areas. And I believe these sorts of turrets were talked about back when they first announced the Pioneer from CNOU. So it's cool to see them in-game. Currently, however, they are just things that exist. They can't be moved. They can't really be relocated either. But you can use them and you can test them and help them with those numbers, and by organizing PvP events with your guilds and your orgs and stuff like that, still use them. So we faced two main challenges with the mounted gun: its size and the control scheme. The eagle-eyed among you would probably have noticed that the mounted gun is a size 1 ship weapon, as we needed that sort of firepower. While these are small on a ship, they are huge in the player's hands, and this provided us with several issues. Firstly, it took up the whole screen in first person, so the line of sight was terrible, and secondly, the pivot point for ship weapons was not ideal for a character trying to aim down the sights and pivot vertically. As we already had a ship weapon, we were able to get it into the editor quickly, and this allowed us to iterate on the first-person experience by very early on without having to worry too much about metrics. This was a real boon as we were able to work out the pivot of the weapon, its viewing angles, and the aim-down sight views, while retaining a believability that this was a weapon that could take down a ship. So even though it looks like a size 1 weapon, they had done some changes to it, is what they're saying, and it doesn't work like a size 1 weapon. It's a bit beefier. I don't exactly know what weapon it compares to, compared to like, other ship weapons, but it is a pretty strong weapon capable, at least in 313, of taking out like bits of like a Hercules, for instance. So the other challenge we faced was the control scheme. We debated for a long time over whether we should use a more FPS-centric control scheme or have something more akin to a ship turret. Fortunately, we had scheduled enough time for us to implement both schemes and play them to see which felt the best. This allowed us to hone in on the experience and deliver a good first iteration. We have also planned long-term to try and add the additional control options to the menu screens so players can choose which they prefer. And yes, this will be on YouTube, Saxon. So what didn't go so well? So using a pre-existing ship weapon allowed us to iterate early on and dial in the metrics without having to create a whole suit of new art. This also had the advantage that going forward, any size 1 ship weapon could theoretically be mounted onto a mount. Unfortunately, this didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped because ship weapons mount from the top rather than the bottom. This meant that the weapon was mounted upside down and had lots of additional geometry that blocked the main view. While this is a relatively easy fix, it does mean that any new weapon we want to use in the future will require further art tweaks and additional data to support it. And yeah, with most weapons you see in the game that are ship weapons, like the Mantis Gatling gun, for instance, if you were to look out the side of, like, let's say a saber on your port and starboard, you have them right there. And visually speaking, it's just, the top of the gun that you see. But underneath is a whole lot of, there's an ammo box, there's a chain, there's all this stuff going on. And if you were to have that in a, like a on the ground sort of weapon, then upside down, you wouldn't be able to see past the ammo box. So it's a whole lot of refactoring that has to be done for these ground weapons. So what are we doing differently in the future? So mounted guns are a feature that requires a content team to implement into the verse. It's not a systemic feature like jump or actor status. So while we always want to get features into the hands of players as soon as possible for testing purposes, I think its current implementation in the PU doesn't really serve a purpose. It really doesn't, unless of course you are trying to make your own content with your guilds and orgs. So in hindsight, I think it would have been better to implement it, ask for specific PTU evocati feedback, and then release it in a later patch once the content teams had enough chance to build something around it. Because again, there is no systemic gameplay built around these emplaced guns. They simply just, for now, exist. But they do exist in a way that players can make their own content with them, hopefully once 3.14 is out and the crime system perhaps isn't so strict as to, basically be counted to any kind of organized fun. So trolley, push, and pull. I believe trolley, push, and pull kind of falls under this same sort of umbrella, as this is a feature we wanted to make, but as for where it falls under gameplay, there's a big old question mark there. But let's have a look and see what Rich said. So what went well? So trolley push and pull is a feature that allows players to interact with an object, such as a trolley or block, and push or pull it to the direction of their choosing, providing that they have grip. As Star Citizen is a sandbox game that has multiple gravities and planets, we needed to make sure that the feature was systemic so that it could work and scale with different weights and environments. We also wanted the trolley to feel physically correct, with heavier loads being harder to control. The team worked directly with the physics programmers in delivering a physically correct model that really feels like you're pushing a trolley or a block. The character leans into heavier loads and the controls feel weighty and grounded, and the wheels themselves are procedurally simulated, so it actually looks really well. And I think that this also tied in later to the Nova tank looking as good as it did. So what didn't go so well? So the team were highly focused on making sure the trolley felt grounded in the world, and they built an elaborate test map that tested multiple facets of the feature, including loading into a ship. Did they? This highlighted a significant problem. A lot of trolleys built over the years had been designed to a character metric with relatively small wheels. Unfortunately, the ships all have different ramps, with some having very hard angular edges and others not lowering to touch the floor at all. This meant that a lot of the trolleys struggled to go up ship ramps, and in some cases could not get over the edge of the ramp as it was too large. Think trying to push a shopping trolley up a curb. As the vehicle team was already scheduled for the quarter, we were not able to deliver the full trolley experience. So it looks like in terms of trolley testing, they didn't really get past the hangar. I think what they will find in their testing, if they haven't already going forwards, is that outposts do not have trolley-friendly terrain. Outposts are comprised, even when you have like the little roads going back and forth to them, of pallets with grooves that have gaps of, several inches. And these trolleys are, like in terms of hitbox porn, done really well. But that is at the detriment of these environments. The trolley's wheels get stuck really easily, and so there needs to be a lot of work either done to these outposts or done to the trolley in order to make them work better. And also, maybe make them less murderous. So what we'll do differently in the future? So trolley push and pull was always designed to serve two purposes: a puzzle mechanic and for cargo loading. So puzzle mechanic definitely there for Squadron 42 for, these Half-Life style like puzzles that you will encounter in a single player game, but also maybe perhaps to be used in like a crash site missions and stuff to get from A to B and to climb to areas that maybe perhaps are blocked off, vents and the like. But also for cargo loading, which will be a very important part in the future. But let's see what Rich has to say. So as a puzzle mechanic, the feature works well and allows the designers to start creating new and interesting missions and spaces where players can use trolleys and blocks to access higher vantage points. As a cargo loading mechanic, it falls short due to the limitations of the wheels and the sizes of the ship ramps. Going forward, we will be developing a hover trolley that will alleviate a lot of our issues and rely on the more traditional trolleys for landing zones and specific missions. So that's always, an out for CIG, is that, they have Giantech, they have the Nox, they have Gravlev in general. Gravlev ramps will, of course, get over, pun unintended, a lot of these issues with the landing zones to allow you to get your boxes onto a gurney or something like that and then move it into your ship without having to worry about your wheels getting stuck in places. And then of course, for the traditional like landing zones and stuff where the ground is generally speaking more flat, you can have these more traditional trolleys doing their thing over there. So yeah, all in all, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do differently with trolleys. We have actually seen trolleys being used differently and being refactored for different purposes in the Orison hospitals in the 314 PTU. You can move these medical beds, you can move these crash carts and stuff around, and it's the same animations and it's the same tech, I believe, being used as that have been used in the trolleys, but they actually work a bit better. Your character doesn't like clip off them. You can have a character lying on the bed and pushing them, meaning that the physics of these things have also been tweaked so they work better. So all in all, I'm looking forward to seeing where trolleys go in the future. Currently, they exist, but that's about all they do, exist. So, here we have reputation, so I guess we can guess what's happening next. I almost all but completely forgot about Reco. So systemic gameplay and services. So Tony Z wrote this one up, the PU game director. So Reputation UI. So what went well? For Alpha 3.13, we were able to release the Reputation UI, giving players a visual representation of and context for our initial Tier 0 release of the Reputation system in Q4 2020. For that release, we had hooked up Reputation to the bounty hunting missions and a few others. And a few others. I can't think of any others. It's all bounty hunting and security related. But players had zero visibility on why their mission progression changed. Yes, back when it wasn't the Reputation system, it was the, I forget what it was, the Affinity system, I think they called it back then. But players had zero visibility of what happened and how or why these missions were changing. We have also instituted the first pass of rewarding players based on their Reputation progress. With the UI now in place, players have much more clarity on their status with both organizations and mission givers. Reputation rewards will really help with allowing players to actually have a reason to play and test Star Citizen in the alpha. Being able to unlock cosmetics, unlock items, weapons, and that kind of thing will be really cool, and something I'm looking forward, because this is, you know, one of those fabled gameplay loops. Just Reputation in and of itself, having a reason to do things, is a gameplay loop. So the overall development and release of this feature went smoothly for the team. The analytics report we received showed incredibly positive results with players in the Alpha 3.13 release, which resulted in a higher engagement rate of the bounty hunting missions. I cannot wait for them to just add this to other things, for them to add Reputation to cargo, to add Reputation to mining. Give me a reason to go mine tungsten, you know? Like, I need that so much. So what didn't go so well? So there was an unexpected hiccup with some changes to the Reputation service that were not communicated well to the feature team. This resulted in a few urgent fixes that needed to be done awfully close to Alpha 3.13's release, so they almost didn't get this out in time. So additionally, we have not converted the entirety of our mission content over to the new system yet, and it cannot wait. Nor have we had time to refactor the mission giver behaviors to be as reactive to the affinity and reliability meters. So while this is an ongoing effort and players should look for continued progress, this will unfortunately take time to churn through the entirety of our missions and refactor the mission giver behaviors. So yeah, it'll take time, but it needs to happen. It really needs to happen. Like, it would have been nice if this happened sooner, especially with so many people coming in from Elite Dangerous and other games, you know, like as a games exodus is happening from certain IPs for different reasons and that kind of thing. It would have been nice to give these new players something to work towards. But there's still a lot of the content for them to look at and see and do. So, yeah. What we'll be doing differently. So we'll be aiming to improve our global communication on features going forward, notably for any that involve services or external feature team support. Cross-team initiatives have consistently proven to have some level of communication breakdown due to our global distribution, so we're always looking for ways to improve this pipeline. Specifically, we are trying to create more technical design documents, or TDDs, prior to starting these larger initiatives. This should help create global awareness, since all applicable groups are required to provide feedback on the TDDs during this process. These, of course, I believe are internal TDDs, because we have some more external ones for things like what they intended medical gameplay, what they intended cargo gameplay, and what they intended things like repair gameplay available on the website, but these are a bit more dated. So also, with the system now in place and our second star system on the horizon once server meshing comes online, we are having ongoing design discussions about how we will structure organizations within the universe for the first 5 systems. These talks include everything from the new player experience and their starting location, how players progress within a single system, and how major organizations will influence content across multiple systems. Now, on the Fortnightly Frontier podcast with Dionator, we actually talked about difficulty. And one thing that I didn't think about at the time, or maybe it crossed my mind but I forgot, was when it comes to starting locations in a game like Star Citizen. In other MMOs, you have like, a starting like village or whatever, like depending on the game and how big it is, you have varying like starting zones. How will starting zones be done in Star Citizen? How will difficulty be done in Star Citizen? And that kind of thing. Will the Stanton system be the only starting system? They've mentioned 5 starting systems for Star Citizen. At least they've mentioned the first 5 is what they're currently focusing on. Stanton is of course one of them. Pyro is of course the second. Nyx is the third because Delamar is there. Croshaw is something that people think might be one of those ones they're talking about because Croshaw is of one of the systems that are tied to that Pyro to Nyx kind of jump point loop. And then I believe Odin might be the last one just because it's a Squadron 42 system that they're already currently working on. So where are we? So throughout this process, we have made significant strides towards what we feel the initial version or vision of how this major progression mechanic will affect the overall player experience. While we still need to get final sign-off, we feel this falls in line with how Reputation has been previously pitched to the public and look forward to driving this forward. Okay, so now we're down to Invictus Launch Week. So what went well? The Expo events associated with Invictus Launch Week went very smoothly. This is a process that we've done multiple times to date, so setting up a new Expo event is a known quantity. On the other side of the spectrum, the US PU team did help to get some additional features out with Invictus that expand our dynamic mission service toolbox. This was the first time we have been able to change the inventory of a shop dynamically based on in-game events. Yo, Mac, thank you for the raid. Welcome, guys. I just headbutted my microphone. We're currently checking out the what's this called again? The Postmortem for 313. This is for YouTube content and stuff, so I'll get back into it. But thank you for the raid. Thank you, man. So this was the first time we've been able to change the inventory of a shop dynamically based on in-game events, something we refer to as dynamic shop modifiers. So of course, during Invictus, we saw things like crafting materials. We saw like not that you as a player could use, but that Lorville was producing that needed to be moved and sold. We saw things like souvenirs that showed up that you needed to sell and things like that. So this will ultimately be tied and controlled by the Quanta tooling that you may have seen us discuss in our most recent video presentation that Tony Z did, that we actually have a video on that you can check there as well. So we can also use it to not only add new event-specific items, but we can also change whether a shop consumes or replenishes these commodities, which ultimately changes the overall price of the item. These changes are for a limited time during the event, so it also allows us to change the economic climate of many shops as we would like to achieve the desired results. And this also then will tie in the future to Ninetales Lockdown, where resources and resource scarcity is going to be tied to Quanta, and they can activate and add different sorts of commodity based on what is happening in lore. During a war and during a lockdown, maybe perhaps a station needs more food. They're consuming more food. They can't get food in. They need medical supplies. People are getting injured by these pirates as they blockade, things like that. So we also added something related to this that will eventually help us expand the cargo profession. Okay, so we call them price threshold triggers. So these are intended to allow us to trigger missions based on the shop inventories hitting designated levels. So again, for me, Star Citizen you can consider an MMO because even though there are 50 people on a server, systemically, everything that you're doing in the game affects this backend server, and this is one of them. So these are intended to allow us to trigger missions based on the shop inventories hitting designated levels. So this means, for example, when food becomes short in a station, you'll get a mission for it and that kind of thing. So however, as a first step towards the creation of missions, we used it to give the players valuable insight into what is currently in demand to purchase or to sell at a given location for the duration of the event. And this actually continued on past the event into what they now call commodity price alerts in the journal. So now you can still see when a station needs or is under a certain value or a certain amount of food, drink, and spirits, and it seems like these figures are ticking over time dynamically, and you as a player can actually make a profit if you look at this thing, but it's still not systemic as they would like it to be, and it's still not visually in a good place. It's buried in the journal. So however, as a first step towards the creation of missions, we used to blah 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 blah. So this was temporarily done via the journal, and it's still there, so via the journal entries, and that are generated by the mission system. So now that they're in, the next step will be to send out game-wide requests, so any distance we choose across a solar system or between systems, as we move towards a quanta-driven universe. So while the work towards visualizing the shop info within the journal is a temporary solution, all the underlying functionality is implemented as intended. So there will be very little to throw away. There'll be very little throwaway work once we redo the mission manager UI or add some level of economy info elsewhere within the game. The time frame on that addition is still to be determined. So a lot of the stuff that will be going into this future commodity price alert stuff, into this dynamic cargo running thing where you as a player will have this more like shared experience with other players of, we've actually done this, you know, we've made sure that we've stopped the famine on this station, or like we're helping to make sure that this is fixed, and you know, to have this impact on the game. That's to be determined, that's coming, but the groundwork is already there. They just need to work on like the quanta system that'll be part of it, and also give it a better place in the Moby-Glass that's not just the journal, which is part of the OG Moby-Glass system, which will be refactored very soon anyway into a more building blocks thing. Alright, so finally, with all that said, the players enjoyed the fact that the shops were exposing items and or changing the prices dynamically during the event. We're looking forward to expanding on this system, as it is really one of the major underpinnings of the economic and cargo systems, and tying this as well to things like the cargo refactor, the physicalized cargo, and all of that. Cargo running is, hopefully sometime down the future gonna be a really robust feature. So what didn't go so well? So we had some changes to the ship's landing gear system that caused irregularities with their default spawn compression values. This ultimately caused a lot of tedious testing on our side to ensure that everything was placed as intended, so that we could confirm that anything we did see was a legitimate problem and not just a placement problem. For dynamic shop modifiers, the biggest stressor was that some of the functionality came in quite late in the process, which left very little time for testing the feature in the PU, and is probably also why there are only 2, maybe 3 different commodities left in there after Invictus happened. Invictus had so many things. It had helium, it had balloons, it had again construction materials, it had souvenirs and AV equipment. And now we just have food, drink, and medical supplies, I think. So had this feature not worked very well when we finally did get it, this would have been a larger problem. The Ninetales lockdown event, supposedly to go out with Alpha 3.13, then Invictus, and now ultimately Alpha 3.14, was also competing for QA bandwidth during this time, which was one of the main reasons it was pushed into Alpha 3.14. With the priority needing to stay on Invictus, we had no choice but to sacrifice Ninetales as a result, which was a letdown internally. But now that we have everything done, and now that Invictus is past us, it does seem like as Tony Z mentioned in that video, that the Ninetales lockdown will be using intrinsically some of this stuff anyway. So it all worked out in the, in the end. So the workflow for setting up the shop modifiers and the price threshold triggers was also not conducive to making large-scale changes quickly. Additionally, it is currently a bit confusing because historically we use the context of buy and sell from the perspective of the player, but this was somehow reversed in the context of threshold triggers. This obviously leads to a lot of confusion when setting these up and absolutely needs to be fixed before going wide with this feature. Additionally, while tuning the threshold triggers, we had a strong desire to change shop entries that we didn't have the ability to edit from the shop modifier UI within Subsumption, which is like their backend system, including base price offset, current inventory, and a couple others. We hacked around this by adding items to the inventory to set them up, then changing their context from buy to sell when commodities were available to be gathered and purchased elsewhere within the universe. While this is a common tactic for designers when tools don't do what they want, it's generally frowned upon because it's ultimately adding debt that you need to get back and fix later. So what they'll do differently in the future, so Tony says, I would like to get additional debugging into the engine that will allow us to quickly debug the landing gear compression discrepancies. To this point though, we've already added some new debugging methods into the game since our last Expo event. However, these discrepancies could potentially be easier to spot with additional debugging feedback as we approach the next Expo event. I would like to dedicate time to ensuring these issues are easily identified and are easily solved by data-driven solutions. The landing gear stuff obviously means Invictus, and it means like the ships as they are landed in display. Because their landing gears themselves were not compressed, they looked weird and maybe perhaps differently to how they would normally look. Things like the Reclaimer, for instance, has these massive landing gears that make it look like a hulking like crab or a gorilla even, and based on compression of that landing gear, like its entire like look can change, and like being able to enter it is also a whole different bag if the landing gears are uncompressed. On things like the Constellation, they've added a new like side flat panels on them. We have typical things like quantum travel and stuff on them, locking and unlocking doors. They've added a couple of new things though, like the transponder, but they've also added a what's the word now, like a hydraulics like dial as well, which I can only imagine is for the player to manually adjust how the landing gear compression is. For things like the Constellation, it's kind of whatever. But for like the Reclaimer, being able to make the Reclaimer do push-ups or like have the Reclaimer like lifted like way up just for the sake of it so people can't get in from underneath is really cool. Okay, so we would like to see some better coordination between QA and the dev teams that require larger scale QA involvement, such as Invictus and Ninetales. We've certainly seen and acknowledged several of the pain points that this has caused, but this will continue to come up as we make more of these events, so we will need to tighten up this workflow moving forward. Ideally, we would try and get the delivery of all gameplay features and related services well in advance of any potential delivery date. For example, well before we branch the next release stream and certainly before going to the PTU. I would also like to see less feature development in the release stream as we move forward. While this still needs to be scheduled, I would like to see the UI presentation of the journal entries cleaned up in any future revisions, as they relate to commodities that are in demand. It needs to order them by landing zone, and then within each landing zone, show things that you can buy and what you can sell. The ideal solution is to have some type of economic info available someplace like the star map. Please, yes, like the star map or a separate app, but as mentioned above, this work currently needs to be scheduled and any additions are TBD. Another cool place to have, but is secondary to having it in the star map or like at the, the trading districts or whatever, is to be able to just like go into scanning mode that 3.14 has added and then just scan the station. Currently, in 314 PTU, you can go into the scanning radar, scan a station, and it gives you a blurb about the station and tells you about it, and it's kind of cool. But it'd be really, really cool if it would also add things like, like just certain trade information, things that they would like, things that they have a surplus of, that kind of stuff. That would be so cool to have all that stuff in there diegetically, to do as well. So, mission features. So, what went well? So, Xenothreat and Fleet Week were two major events worked on by the mission feature team in the first quarter of 2021. The collaboration between US and other departments on both initiatives, or us and other departments on both initiatives, especially QA, was stronger than it has ever been previously. And we think you can see that in the finished product. Xenothreat needed a bit more time to balance and iron out the remaining bugs, and thankfully we were allowed that time, even though the initial expectation was that it would be released for the holiday season. Additionally, Xenothreat 2 is coming out because, hey, they've polished it, they want to do it. Luckily, we were able to add content to the caves. This was not even on our planned deliverables list for the quarter, but it seemed a shame to release new cave entrances without something present there. Thank God they did. We also added a lot more mission locations in the Yellow Asteroid Ring. I need to do more missions around Yellow because I have not really done that or looked around for that. Interesting. So our team was able to add a new Debug Gui, which is now proving invaluable for identifying issues at a far more rapid pace. And the creation of new delivery missions went quickly and smoothly, notably to well-established mission modules and the reuse of entities from Xenothreat, and the reuse of Xenothreat coming soon. So what didn't go so well? So Xenothreat, as mentioned, didn't hit its intended release date. This was obviously unfortunate, but given the scope of what we were trying to achieve with this event, we felt this was understandable, and thankfully we were able to give it the proper amount of time to further polish it until it was ready. Creating and maintaining unique entities was also an issue. For example, the quantum travel sensitive boxes were a mixture of several teams' work, so when it comes to bugs, it was often difficult to get traction. Continued maintenance of these could now also be an issue, as there really isn't a defined developer to own and sustain them. That's a bit of an issue. So parasite ships also caused issues for the lore system that weren't spotted until after the initial release of Alpha 3.13, and that of course is the Merlin, and the fact that if a pirate ship constellation attacks you and you destroy the constellation, the little Merlin's innocent, right? So because you hit that and you destroy that, you get a crime stat, which is not ideal. So they've since fixed that though. So what we'll do differently in the future. So we'll aim to push for the team to be included on any feature that may affect or require support from the lore system to try and get ahead of and hopefully minimize any unforeseen issues for future initiatives. Alright, so yeah, about those caves though, man, I mean, like, the caves are so interesting and so cool. I just wish that there was more content with them. They're kind of in that same kind of places, landing zones for me. So much space, so much potential, and we know that it's coming, but I just can't wait for that to come through. And we know we're getting like escort missions in Star Citizen soon, not just like the ship ones that we used to have around Yella, but also now on foot, now that they've worked on things like NPC nav meshing and stuff like that. So not only will you find these unconscious and dead bodies in caves, soon you'll have to use medicine to revive them and then take them back to your ship or whatever, and then take them to hospital, which is stuff I look forward to seeing. Alright, now it's time for systemic services and tools. So what went well? So additional resources from the back-end teams provided an immediate relief for workload for the Systemic Services and Tools, or SST team. The Supercache was deployed, and work was able to start on several longer-term initiatives to integrate quantum into more services. And that's always good to hear. The public presentation came together well and was received very positively. The technology that we invested into presentation displays will be used to demonstrate other high-level concepts in the future. Quasar was deployed, which is the dynamic mission tool demonstrated during the SST update video released in April. So SST again means Systemic Services and Tools. So everything Quanta, Quasar, and NPC related, and Subsumption I imagine as well. So deployment of Quasar was straightforward due to the previous work done with Odin last year. Odin, of course, I think in this case means the Odin system, which of course is probably not. I think Odin is also something they've named another internal system for like lockdown and things like that. Yeah, Odin is that graphing tool. Yes, thank you, Chosen. Alright, so which tackled most of the foundational work required to hook into live services and the DGS instances. Going forward, the Quasar tool will provide a platform through which dynamic mission content can be instantiated via Quantum. So Quantum on the horizon. Work on the air traffic control service continued, and the Systemic Services Tools team spent time developing a standalone object container decompressor to allow the injection of specific data points to assets without needing to manually re-export each object container through the editor. This work will unlock several other critical areas for data manipulation required for the future SST projects. And it's very interesting that the air traffic control, you know, like the stations and stuff, is going to be like so heavily integrated to the whole quantum system. It's not just, oh, I'm at this station, I'm going to press this button so I'm able to land. It's a systemic thing that, didn't they say you'll also be guided to your pad by voice, like by the NPCs through like AI like voice and stuff like that? When it comes out, it'll be very interesting because like I can't even think about how it's going to be done. They've done so many changes to landing zones throughout the years, things like quantum, not even quantum splines, but just landing splines, the no-fly zones and stuff like that. This next iteration seems to be something completely different. So what didn't go so well? So a new high-speed AI service was needed to map live positions of mission-spawned NPCs, which ended up being deceptively complex. This new service required work from various teams and pillars, which caused delays and difficulties in testing. Many of our team resources continue to be absorbed addressing bugs that don't end up being in our sphere of responsibility. Ain't our problem what we're doing in the future. So future presentations will be significantly more straightforward in terms of the content we demonstrate. So nothing as crazy as Tony Z's like Quanta, Quasar and everything else. And we invested in visualization tools to be able to show high-level concepts on the star map quickly and easily. We identified issues causing delays on the new services like the high-speed AI service and are now more capable of dealing with cross-team initiatives like this going forward. With the groundwork of Quantum laid, we will be able to focus on the integration of other services. We're now better able to identify issues that don't fall under the responsibility of our team and plan to reroute these issues to appropriate teams, saving our team members much needed time to develop services work. Alright, here's an image of Invictus Launch Week. So, locations. This time it's Ian Leyland, the Star Citizen Art Director. So Ian says, what went well? So Invictus Launch Week at the Tobin Convention Center was a fantastic thing to see, as were the new space station docking modules and military docks for the event. Outside of what we released in Alpha 3.13, it allowed the team to focus on making solid progress on future locations for the game. What didn't go so well? The docking feature caused some back and forth among the various teams involved, reducing efficiency. The trolley push and pull feature created a lot of bugs for the teams that could have been reduced too. Things that they've already mentioned up above. So what we'll do differently in the future. So internally, we follow a process of features and locations having a go, no-go. With regards to a feature like docking, the teams were very compressed in building the feature and creating the locations at the same time. And we still have some weird issues at the moment, even in 3.14 PCU with the docking stations and docking ports. In the future, to reduce the inefficiency this creates, we will look to have more of a buffer between a feature being made and the location being made that utilizes it. Okay, which means that in general we'll likely see the features later I suppose, as a result. Alright, so that seems to be that for the Postmortem for 3.13 and Invictus. So all in all, cool stuff. It's good to hear the devs and the pillar leads and all that talk about what went wrong and all that stuff. It kind of inspires a bit of confidence when they do that kind of stuff, to be honest. Alright, so anyway, so I don't keep people who are watching on YouTube any longer than I have to, thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, thank you again. I will make sure that for this video and videos going forwards, we'll also have these in segments, so that, of course, if you've been watching this on YouTube, of course, it's a bit too late, but you should see segments now on the bottom of the play bar that show you when the different teams have spoken. So if you're not interested, let's say if we were to do a monthly report and we're reading engineering, you can go from engineering straight to active feature team and stuff like that. But thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video and you want to see more things like this, please feel free to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, guys, as always, be good.